Just make it quick, she said, her voice shaking like something already half gone. The words struck through Jax's chest like a bullet he hadn't seen coming. He froze in the middle of the canyon, heat shimmering off the cracked ground, the smell of metal and burnt plasma still hanging in the air. The alien woman was slumped against a slab of red stone, one hand pressed weakly to the gash that crossed her ribs. Her skin, a deep green shimmer that caught the light like polished stone, was streaked with silver blood and desert dust. The sight should have meant nothing to him, another casualty in a war that had never been his, but something in her eyes stopped him cold. They were too human in their fear. She flinched when his shadow touched her. Her breathing hitched, ragged, desperate, as if she expected the end to come fast and cruel. For a long moment, Jax just stood there, staring at her trembling fingers, the faint tremor in her throat as she tried to summon the courage to die. He had seen hundreds like her on both sides, bodies broken by orders they never gave. But none had ever spoken to him like this. None had asked it as though mercy was a myth. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, but the words sounded empty even to him. Her gaze flicked to the pistol in his hand, to the insignia still scratched into the worn plating on his shoulder, the mark of the Helion Syndicate, the same mercenaries who had burned her people out of the valleys. Jax cursed under his breath and holstered the weapon, raising his palms slowly. "You see this gun?" he said quietly. "It's not for you." She didn't believe him. The way her pupils narrowed, the way her body pressed against the rock as if trying to melt into it. It was the look of someone who'd already been betrayed by promises before. "What's your name?" he asked. Voice low, steady. She hesitated, eyes darting across his face, searching for a lie. "Tiri," she whispered, the syllables soft, melodic, like a language made for wind and water instead of war. "All right, Tiri," he said, "you're bleeding out. Let me help." Her head shook, slow, resigned. "Help?" She laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "Your kind helped enough." Jax dropped to one knee, staying just out of reach. "If I wanted you dead, you'd already be gone," he said. "Let me stop the bleeding." The desert wind hissed between the rocks, carrying dust and silence. Finally she nodded, so faintly he almost missed it. He tore a strip from his scarf and pressed it against the wound. The moment his hand touched her skin, she tensed, a full-body shudder that spoke of old pain. Her blood was warm and metallic, pulsing through his fingers, but underneath that was a faint vibration, like her veins hummed with current. "You'll live," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if it was true. Her lips trembled. "Why would you care?" He didn't answer at first. He didn't have one. All he knew was that for the first time in years, the face of someone begging him for mercy wasn't fading into the background noise of war. It was real, vivid, impossible to turn away from. He looked around the canyon. The wreckage of burned skiffs still smoked in the distance. If he stayed here, patrol drones would sweep through before nightfall. "We can't stay," he said. "Can you walk?" She tried, but the moment she put weight on her leg, it buckled. He caught her before she hit the ground. Her sharp gasp hit his ear like a plea, but she didn't pull away. He lifted her easily, one arm under her knees, the other around her back. Her armor was slick with blood and dust, her breath shallow against his neck. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't take me to them." "I'm not," he said steady. "You're coming with me." He carried her across the sand, boots crunching on scattered glass from shattered helmets, the sun sinking low behind him. Every step felt heavier, not from her weight, but from the memory of what he'd been part of. Years ago, he had walked away from the syndicate, thinking he could bury his sins under distance and silence. But here they were again, staring back at him through the eyes of a dying alien who thought he was her executioner. When he reached his speeder, he laid her carefully on the seat. She winced, clutching the edge, watching him with suspicion and exhaustion. "Wait, mister?" she asked again, her voice raw. Jax powered the engine, the hum filling the air. "Because you don't deserve to die in a ditch," he said. "Nobody does." She looked away, eyes glinting like wet stone. "We all deserve something." He didn't argue, he just drove. The desert blurred past in streaks of red and gold. Every so often he glanced at her reflection in the rear mirror. her head tilted against the seat, her eyes half closed but still wary. The last light of the sun caught the faint scars on her temple, the burns along her shoulder. She wasn't a soldier. She was something else. The kind of person wars were built on top of. By the time they reached the outskirts of the canyon ridge, where his hideout lay buried beneath the rock, the air had cooled, the horizon gone indigo. Jax parked the speeder under the overhang, then lifted her again, careful not to jostle her wounds. The outpost door hissed open as they stepped inside. It was small, half-lit, cluttered with old tools and ration packs. She glanced around confused, her breathing uneven. This is your den?" "Something like that," he said, setting her gently on the narrow cot. "You'll be safe here." She looked at him sharply. "Safe. You keep saying that word as if it means something." He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. She stared at it for a long time before taking it, her fingers trembling. "Where are the others?" she asked. "The men who did this." "Gone," Jax said quietly, "but I'll find them." Her eyes flicked up to him, unreadable. "You say that like it matters." "It does to me." Something in his tone made her pause. For the first time, her gaze softened. Barely, but enough for him to see the person behind the armor, in pain. She drank slowly, each swallow a struggle. When she set the cup down, she said, "You trembled when you touched me." Jax exhaled, surprised she'd noticed. "I haven't held anything alive in a long time." Her lips curved, not quite a smile. "Then you're not as empty as you look." He pulled a thin blanket over her, moving quietly. Outside, the wind howled across the desert, rattling the loose metal of the roof. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace, and something dangerous stirring beneath it. When he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "If you were one of them, would you tell me?" He hesitated, hand on the door. "Yes," he said, "and I'd still try to make it right." She didn't answer. Her eyes followed him as he stepped outside, the door sliding shut between them. He stood under the rising moons, the desert stretching, endless and silent. The memory of her words, "Just make it quick," echoed in his head. He had every reason to leave her there to die, but something in her voice, in that fragile mix of defiance and surrender, had done what years of blood hadn't. It had reminded him what it meant to be human. And as the night wrapped around the outpost, Jax knew one truth more dangerous than any weapon he had ever carried. He wasn't done with her story. Not until justice, and something far deeper, was found. Teray woke in the dim orange glow of a flickering lantern. The hum of old machinery filled the silence, steady and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the metal cave around her. Her wounds ached, a deep, throbbing pain beneath the makeshift bandages Jax had wrapped. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then the scent of oil and desert air brought it back. The human, the one who didn't kill her. She pushed herself up, grimacing, her armor plates clinking faintly. Across the room, Jax sat at a workbench, turning a broken blaster over in his hands. His face was drawn in shadow, jaw tight, eyes distant. He hadn't noticed she was awake, or maybe he had, and was waiting to see what she would do. "You could have left me out there," she said, her voice raw. He didn't look up. "Could have," he said quietly. "Didn't." Teray watched him in silence. The human's cabin was crude but organized, shelves lined with scavenged parts, tools, a half-cleaned rifle. Yet there were things here that didn't belong to a killer. A book of old Earth poems, a music chip, a cracked photograph showing a man in uniform beside two children. She studied the picture, wondering which of those smiles had belonged to him before the war carved the life out of his eyes. "Why save me?" she asked again, sharper this time. "Your people hunt mine for credits. There's a bounty on every Vithari head used to be," he said. "Most bounties dried up after the syndicate pulled out. Then why risk it?" He finally turned toward her. His gaze was steady, but there was something heavy behind it. Regret, maybe, or a truth he didn't want to speak. "Because you look like you'd stopped believing anyone would help you," he said. "And I know that feeling." She didn't reply. She didn't trust him, couldn't trust him. But his tone was different from the cold commands she remembered from her captors. There was no pride in his voice, no sense of ownership, just exhaustion. Jack stood and walked toward her slowly, setting a ration pack on the table. Eat, he said. You'll heal faster. I don't take orders, she murmured, then consider it advice. He turned away, giving her space, which somehow disarmed her more than any weapon could. After a few minutes, hunger won. She tore open the pack and tasted the bland protein inside. It was cold, tasteless, but it was life. Outside, the desert wind moaned through the cracks in the rock, a sound like whispering ghosts. Tarai stared at the door, calculating her chances. Her strength was returning, but slowly. If she ran, she wouldn't make it far before collapsing. If he meant to turn her in, he would have done it already. And yet, trust felt like a trap she'd fallen for before. Hours passed in quiet. Jax worked without speaking, soldering circuits, cleaning weapons, every motion deliberate. Occasionally he glanced toward her, not out of suspicion, but to make sure she was still breathing. When she tried to stand, he moved to help, but she waved him off. I can walk, she said. He stepped back, nodding. Good. Means the medicine's working. She took 2 steps and nearly fell. Jax caught her arm, his touch firm but gentle. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, hers wide with instinctive fear, his calm but haunted. He let go immediately. I'm not them, he said. Her jaw tightened. They said that too. He said nothing after that, only moved aside as she steadied herself. The silence between them thickened until it felt alive. That night, when the sun sank below the canyon ridge and the cold crept in, Jack lit a fire in the old vent shaft. The light cast long shadows across the cabin walls. Tarai sat opposite him, her hands clasped around the metal cup of water he'd given her. She stared into the flames, seeing shapes from memory, faces, screams, the flash of plasma rounds cutting through her convoy. Do you ever sleep? She asked quietly. Not well, Jack said. She nodded, understanding more than she wanted to. When I close my eyes, I see them. The mercenaries. I hear the laughter, the smell of blood. It doesn't leave. Jax's hand tightened around the edge of his chair. Helion Syndicate? Her gaze lifted sharply. You know them. He hesitated. I've crossed paths. They burned my village, she said, voice low but steady. They killed healers, children, even the songkeepers. My people used to say the Vithari were born from stars, that our blood carried light. They turned that light into ash. Jax's throat felt tight. He'd heard the stories from the other side, told his victories, clean and justified. But hearing it from her, seeing the raw wounds still open, stripped those lies bare. Who led them? He asked. 3 humans, she said. 1 older, scarred. The others, boys. Drunk on power and blood, Jax looked away. He remembered the names. He remembered the laughter, the smoke. The realization sank deep into his gut like a stone. Those were his old squad mates. He'd left before the massacre, but he'd trained them. He'd built the monsters she was running from. He stood abruptly, pacing toward the wall. They're still out there, he said under his breath. She studied him, her eyes narrowing. You speak as if you knew them. He didn't answer. The silence told her enough. She rose slowly, ignoring the pain, and crossed the room until they were face to face. What were you to them, she demanded. Their captain? Their friend? Jax met her gaze. Their mistake. Her hand shot out, gripping his collar, fury trembling through her fingers. You wear their mark, she hissed. You brought this war to my people. He didn't resist. He let her rage burn, let her shove him back against the wall, her voice shaking with grief. When her strength gave out and she slumped forward, he caught her before she hit the floor. I walked away from them, he said, his voice low, long before they came for your people. I didn't stop them. I should have, and I'll spend whatever time I've got left trying to make that right. Her breath came in sharp, broken gasps. You can't fix what's gone. No, he agreed, but I can make sure they don't do it again. For a long time, neither moved. The fire crackled softly, filling the silence. Slowly, Tarai pulled back, eyes still glistening with unshed tears. You'd risk your life for a Vithari? Already did, he said simply. Might as well finish what I started. Something in her expression shifted. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of something like understanding. She turned away, sitting heavily on the edge of the cot. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, a rare storm gathering on the horizon. Jax checked the roof seals, making sure the place would hold. When he returned, Teray was staring out the small viewport, watching lightning crawl across the dunes like veins of fire. "They said storms cleanse the air," she murmured. "Maybe it can cleanse us too." He leaned against the wall beside her, watching the rain begin to fall. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it just reminds us what needs rebuilding." For the first time, she smiled faintly, though it vanished as quickly as it came. The room filled with the sound of rain on metal, steady and fragile. When the lights flickered, she reached for his hand and without thinking, fingers cold against his. He didn't pull away. The touch wasn't trust, not yet. It was survival, the shared recognition that both had been broken by the same machine and somehow were still breathing. Hours later, when she finally drifted to sleep, Jack sat watching her from across the room, the firelight painting her face in golden shadow. He saw the faint bioluminescence of her veins beneath her skin, glowing like tiny constellations. For the first time in years, he didn't see an enemy. He saw what the war had stolen, and what it might still be possible to save. As the storm raged outside, Jax whispered to the empty air, to the ghosts of men he once called brothers. "You'll pay for what you did, Mom," he said, "not because I hate you, but because she deserves to live." He looked back at Tyreye, sleeping lightly, her breath even now, her wounds beginning to heal. The storm howled across the desert, but inside the small metal cabin, something quiet was being born. Something dangerous, fragile, and real. Dawn came cold and colorless over the desert. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean, sharp, and heavy with silence. Teray woke to find Jax already outside, his silhouette framed by the pale light creeping through the canyon mouth. He was standing by the speeder, loading weapons, checking fuel cells, every motion deliberate. She watched him through the narrow crack in the door for a long while before stepping out. "You're leaving," she said. He didn't turn. "We're leaving." Her brows furrowed. "We?" Jack slid the rifle into its holster and looked at her over his shoulder. "I told you I'd find the ones who did this." "I can't do it without you." She folded her arms, still weak but steady. "And what then? You'll kill them and call it justice?" His jaw tightened. "You tell me what it should be called." For a moment they stood in the cold morning light, staring at each other, one fueled by guilt, the other by grief. The silence between them wasn't anger anymore. It was something deeper, heavier, filled with things neither of them knew how to say. She finally nodded, slow and deliberate. "Then let's find them." By the time the suns climbed above the ridge, they were already riding across the wasteland. The desert stretched endless and unforgiving, broken only by the jagged shapes of old mining towers and the bones of ships half swallowed by sand. Jax handled the speeder in silence while Teray watched the horizon, her cloak snapping in the wind. Hours passed before she spoke. "You still wear their mark." He glanced down at the worn insignia on his shoulder armor. "It's a reminder." "Of what?" He exhaled, eyes fixed on the dunes. "Of who I never want to be again." Teray's gaze lingered on him, studying the man beneath the scars. "Humans always say that," she murmured, "but then they build new wars to forget the old ones." "Maybe," but he said, "but some of us are trying to stop repeating them." She didn't answer. The wind swallowed her silence. By midday, they reached a cluster of rusted domes that had once been a supply post. Jax slowed the speeder and dismounted, scanning the area. A burned-out sign read, "Outpost 17." Inside, the air smelled of fuel and dust. He searched the shelves, finding old rations and a cracked data pad. Teray traced her fingers along the walls, her glowing veins faint in the dim light. "Someone's been here recently," she said. He nodded, studying footprints in the sand. "3 sets," he murmured. "Human." Her throat tightened. "Them?" "Maybe." He checked the data pad, scrolling through corrupted files until one flickered to life. A supply log stamped with the Helion insignia and a date from 2 days ago. "They're close," he said. The words tasted like metal between them. They left the outpost behind, following the faint trail north toward the cliffs of Ralvor, where the syndicate had built their refineries years ago. The land grew rougher, littered with jagged black rock that shimmered faintly under the suns. As night began to fall, they made camp beside a broken transport hull. Jax built a small fire while Tiraye sat in silence, her gaze distant. "When you find them," she said softly, "what will you do?" "Depends on what they say." "And if they laugh?" He met her eyes across the fire. "Then I stopped them from laughing again." Her expression didn't change, but her eyes glimmered with something fierce. "You think killing them will give me peace?" "No," he said, "but it'll give you choice. And that's something they took from you." She stared at the flames, remembering her grandmother's words about the balance between justice and vengeance. "You speak like someone who's lost more than he admits," she whispered. Jax's gaze drifted toward the horizon. "I lost a wife," he said quietly. "2 children. Syndicate crossfire, wrong planet, wrong night." Tarai looked up sharply, the words cutting through her bitterness. "I'm sorry," she said. He shook his head. "Don't be. I was the one who built the gun that killed them." The confession hung in the air like smoke. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Tarai reached across the fire, her fingers brushing the back of his hand. "You carry your ghosts," she said. "So do I. Maybe they'll walk quieter if we face them together." He didn't pull away. By dawn, they reached the canyon mouth leading into the Ralvor Basin. From a distance, they could see lights, 3 speeder bikes parked beside a weather-beaten saloon built from scavenged metal. It looked like a place where people disappeared without questions. "That's them," Jack said, his voice low. Teray's heart pounded, each beat echoing with memory. She recognized the sound of their laughter before she even saw their faces. She could still smell the smoke from that night, the crackle of burning herbs. Her palms began to tremble. Jax placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to go in," he said. She shook her head. "I do." He nodded, and together they walked toward the saloon. The air inside was thick with the stench of cheap liquor and rust. 3 men sat at a corner's table, laughing over a bottle. The leader was older, gray-bearded, his hands scarred. The others were younger, restless, drunk. Tirai froze. The sound of their voices clawed at her chest. Her pulse roared in her ears. Jax's hand tightened around his weapon. He didn't need to ask. He knew. The older man glanced up, his gaze settling on Jax. A sneer twisted his mouth. "Well, I'll be damned." "Jax Halden, the prodigal bastard, returns." Jax's jaw flexed. "Didn't expect to find you alive, Carr." Carr laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "Alive and rich, thanks to you. You trained us well." His eyes slid toward Tarai, and recognition flared. "And look here, you brought a souvenir." Tarai's blood went cold. Jax drew his pistol before the words had finished leaving the man's mouth. "Watch it," he said quietly. The saloon fell silent. Carr leaned back, smirking. "So that's how it is? You turned soft? Fighting for them now, are you?" Jax's voice was steady, calm like a drawn blade. "You crossed a line, Carr. You killed people who couldn't fight back." "Orders are orders," Carr said with a shrug. "You used to know that." "Not anymore." The young one with red hair snorted. "You hear him? He's got a conscience now." Before Jax could move, Tirai stepped forward, her voice steady but trembling beneath the weight of memory. "You remember me?" she asked. The room seemed to tilt. Carr's smirk faltered. "You?" "Yes," she said. "You left me bleeding under the suns. You told me no one would care." "You were wrong." The red-haired man reached for his weapon, but Jax's gun was faster. The shot cracked through the silence, blasting a hole in the wall beside his head. "Next one goes through your heart," Jax said coldly. The patrons scattered. Carr's hands twitched toward his holster, but Tirai's blade was already drawn, the edge glowing faintly with bioluminescent energy. "You think I'm afraid of you?" Carr spat. Tirai's voice was soft, trembling but fierce. "No, I think you're afraid of what I remind you of." He lunged and everything erupted at once. Jax fired, once, twice. The red-haired man dropped. The nervous one dove behind a table. Carr's blade caught Jax's shoulder, slicing deep, but before he could strike again, Tirai drove her weapon through his hand. His scream tore through the saloon, echoing against the metal walls. She could have ended it there. The tip of her blade hovered above his throat. Her entire body shook, years of pain and fury rising like fire. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw nothing. No remorse, no humanity, just the hollow void of someone already dead inside. Her arm fell. She stepped back. "No," she whispered. "You don't deserve my hate." Jack stood bleeding beside her, watching as the man collapsed, cursing her name. "It's over," he said, his voice rough. Turai turned toward him. "Not yet." She knelt beside the wounded man, looked him in the eyes, and said softly, "Remember what mercy feels like. It's the last thing you'll ever see." They left the saloon in silence. Behind them, the fire Jack had started spread through the dry timber, swallowing the past in flames. Outside, under the rising suns, Turai stopped and looked back one last time. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I thought I'd feel whole again." Jax wrapped his arm around her, his own blood dark against the sand. "Healing doesn't start with their death," he said. "It starts when you stop needing it." She looked up at him, eyes shining with tears she hadn't shed in years. "Then maybe it starts today." As they walked into the desert light, their shadows stretched long across the dunes. Two broken souls bound not by vengeance anymore, but by something fragile and alive that refused to die. The desert burned quiet beneath twin suns, their light bleeding gold across the endless horizon. Smoke rose behind them from the ruins of the saloon, twisting upward into the bright, merciless sky. Jax and Turai rode without speaking, the hum of the speeder filling the silence between them. Every gust of wind carried the scent of ash and gunpowder. Jax's arm bled through the bandage he had tied over his shoulder, each vibration of the engine sending a wave of pain in through him. But he didn't slow down. Turai sat behind him, her hands pressed lightly to his back, steadying herself. Her touch was careful, hesitant, still afraid of closeness, but there was no fear of him anymore, only weariness. When the sun began to dip, they reached a ridge overlooking the Ralvora refinery, the final stronghold of the Helion Syndicate. The facility sprawled across the valley like a metallic scar, its towers spitting black smoke into the orange sky. Jax cut the engine and climbed down, scanning the perimeter through his scope. Armed guards patrolled along the fences, and the faint hum of drones rippled through the air. "This is where it ends," he murmured. Turai stepped beside him, the fading light reflecting off the silver markings on her skin. "That man inside, he ordered the attack?" "Yeah," Jack said. "Commander Vale. He's the one who gave the command to purge your settlement. The one who paid Carr's squad." She stared down at the complex, her eyes dark with something old and heavy. "You knew him?" Jax nodded. "He trained me. Called me his son once." The silence stretched long and sharp. Turai looked at him, realizing the weight of what he was about to do. "If you go down there, you might not come back." He gave a small, humorless smile. "I stopped coming back a long time ago." They descended through the ravine under the cover of darkness. The air grew colder as they approached the outer wall. Jax hacked through a service gate while Turai kept watch, her senses sharp, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Once inside, they crept between rusted tanks and humming machinery, moving like shadows. The deeper they went, the stronger the hum became, a low, pulsing rhythm coming from beneath the refinery floor. Turai frowned. "That sound, it's alive." Jax glanced at her. "Alive?" "It's Vithari tech," she whispered. "They're using my people's power cores, the ones we made for healing colonies." Her voice trembled. "They turned them into weapons." Jax's grip tightened on his rifle. "Then we shut it down." They slipped into the central chamber. The glow of machinery bathed the room in a sickly blue light. Massive containment pods lined the walls, each one filled with crystalline energy pulsing like a heartbeat. The cores of her people, stolen, corrupted, repurposed. Turai stepped forward, her hand trembling as she pressed her palm against the glass of one pod. The energy flickered, reacting to her touch. "They're still active," she whispered. "Still alive in a way." Behind them, a voice echoed through the metal chamber. "You always were sentimental, Jax." Jax turned, weapon raised. Commander Vale stood at the entrance, flanked by guards in syndicate armor. His face was older now, harder, but the cruel confidence in his eyes hadn't changed. And you, he said, looking at Teraye, are exactly the reason wars never end. Because someone always tries to save what should have been erased. Teraye's breath caught, fury flashing in her gaze. You ordered the slaughter. Vale shrugged. Necessary. The Vithari stood in the way of progress. And I needed proof of loyalty from my new recruits. Jax's voice was low, dangerous. You turned men into monsters and called it progress. Vale's smile was cold. Monsters build empires, boy. You just never had the stomach to be great. The guards stepped forward. Jax fired first. The room erupted into chaos, gunfire cracking, energy bolts slicing through the dark. Teraye dove behind the machinery, her blade igniting with blue light as she cut down one guard, then another. Sparks showered the floor. Jax moved like a ghost, every shot precise, controlled. But Vale was faster than age should have allowed. He drew his weapon and fired, hitting Jax in the side. The impact threw him backward, the breath ripping from his lungs. Jax, Teraye shouted, running toward him. He waved her back. Get to the core. Shut it down. She hesitated, torn between rage and fear, then sprinted to the control terminal. Her fingers flew across the glowing interface, the alien symbols reacting to her touch. Alarms blared, lights flickering red. Vale turned his weapon toward her, fury twisting his face. You don't know what you're doing. Jax pushed himself to his knees, blood pooling under him. She knows exactly what she's doing. He fired once more, the shot catching Vale in the chest. The commander staggered, his weapon clattering to the floor. You think this changes anything? Vale gasped. There'll always be another war. Another you. Not if I can help it, Jax said. He fired again. Vale fell, still smiling as he died. Teraye's hands trembled as she finished the sequence. The hum of the refinery changed pitch, growing louder, purer. The corrupted light faded from the cores, replaced by a soft, clean glow. Then the machines powered down one by one, plunging the room into stillness. She turned back toward Jax and froze. He was slumped against the wall, blood spreading dark across his shirt. She ran him, dropping to her knees. No, stay with me, she whispered, pressing her hands over the wound. He tried to smile. Looks worse than it is. Liar. Her voice cracked. His hand found hers, weak but steady. You did it, he said softly. You ended it. Her tears shimmered as they fell onto his skin. Don't you dare leave me now. He exhaled slowly, eyes closing. Guess I finally made something right. Teraye's chest tightened with a sudden, furious grief. She pressed both palms over the wound, summoning the faint energy that still lived within her blood. Her veins lit with a pale blue glow, threads of light weaving through her fingers into his body. The air vibrated, alive with soft hums, as if the planet itself had begun to breathe again. Jax gasped, his back arching, and the light spread across his chest, sealing torn flesh, knitting blood and skin together. Teraye trembled, the effort draining her strength, but she didn't stop until his breathing steadied. When she finally collapsed beside him, her glow faded. Jax opened his eyes. You healed me. She smiled weakly. I returned what was taken. He sat up slowly, catching her as she started to fall. You shouldn't have done that. It could have killed you, then at least I would have gone knowing you kept your promise, she whispered. He held her close, his hand cradling the back of her head. You're not dying on me. Not after all this. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his. When you first touched me, you trembled. Do you still? He shook his head. No, he said softly. Not anymore. They sat in silence as the last light of the day poured through the shattered roof, washing over them in gold. The refinery was dead, the cores silent. Outside, the desert wind carried the faint scent of rain, rare, cleansing, alive. Jax stood, helping Teraye to her feet. Together they stepped out of the ruins, walking side by side through the cooling sand. Above them, the stars began to emerge, bright, endless, the same sky that had watched them both break and rebuild. As they reached the ridge, Teraye looked back one last time. Do you think they'll ever understand? She asked. Who? Your people. Mine. The ones who believe difference means war. He glanced toward the horizon. Maybe not today, but someone has to start. She looked up at him, her eyes glowing faintly in the twilight. Then let's start it. He smiled, a small, quiet thing, and took her hand. They walked until the refinery was only a shadow behind them, the night swallowing the last traces of smoke. The wind moved gently around them, carrying whispers of a future not yet written, one built not from vengeance or blood, but from the fragile, fearless act of holding on. And when the first stars shimmered overhead, Teray turned to him and said softly, "You trembled when you held me first. Now you never have to." Again, Jax's hand tightened around hers, steady and sure. "No," he said, his voice low and certain. "Never again." The desert stretched infinite and silent before them, but this time they didn't walk alone.